Imagine this, a world where poets and writers, instead of just creating beautiful verses, also served as ambassadors negotiating peace and alliances between kingdoms. Sounds bizarre, right? But this was the reality in the 14th century, a time when the power of words could shape the fate of nations. One of these poets, a man named Petrarch, even served as an envoy for the powerful Visconti family in Italy. This era was marked by intricate diplomacy, where every word and gesture held significant weight, and even the slightest mistake could lead to war. In the late 14th century, Europe was embroiled in a long and brutal conflict known as the 100 Years' War. This war, which actually lasted for over a century, was a series of conflicts between England and France. The battles were fierce, and the negotiations were equally intense. One of the key players in these negotiations was a man named Enguerrand, and the seventh, also known as the Lord of Coucy. Coucy was a prominent French nobleman who found himself caught between his loyalty to France and his connections to the English crown. In 1377, Coucy was deeply involved in a series of negotiations that aimed to end the war. These talks were held in Montreuil, a town in northern France, in an ancient castle that overlooked the sea. The negotiators, including Coucy and other high-ranking officials from both England and France, discussed complex proposals involving territories like Scotland, Castile, and Calais. The French king, Charles V, offered to give England control over 12 cities in Aquitaine if the English would return Calais and other territories they had taken in Picardy. However, the English, still holding a foothold in northern France, refused to accept any deal that would weaken their position. While these negotiations were taking place, England was facing its own internal turmoil. The Duke of Lancaster, a powerful nobleman, was struggling to maintain control over the kingdom. He had suppressed some of the unrest, but the situation remained volatile. One of the key figures in this conflict was a man named John Wycliffe, a theologian and reformer who was challenging the authority of the church. Wycliffe's ideas were considered heretical, and he was summoned to a trial at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The Duke of Lancaster, seeing an opportunity to discredit the church, attended the trial with his armed retinue. The proceedings turned chaotic, and a mob gathered outside the cathedral, threatening violence. The Bishop of London, who was popular with the citizens, stood his ground against the Duke, and the situation nearly erupted into a full-scale riot. Lancaster, realizing the danger, was forced to withdraw, and the trial was adjourned. Meanwhile, in France, the negotiations at Montreuil were reaching a critical point. King Charles V was determined to secure a favorable deal, and he insisted that the English accept his terms. However, the English envoys, lacking the authority to make such a decision, stalled. The talks eventually broke down, and the little Princess Marie, who was being considered for a marriage alliance with the English Prince Richard, died. This eliminated one of the key elements of the proposed peace treaty. Tragedy struck England shortly after the negotiations ended. King Edward III, who had been on the throne for 50 years, died on June 23, 1377. His death was met with little fanfare, and he was deserted by many of his closest advisors. A 10-year-old boy, Richard II, ascended the throne, marking the beginning of a tumultuous period in English history. The transition of power was smooth, but the underlying tensions and conflicts remained unresolved. For Coucy, the death of King Edward III presented a significant challenge. He had long maintained a delicate balance between his loyalty to France and his connections to the English crown. However, with the war continuing and the new English king on the throne, Coucy knew he had to make a choice. In August 1377, he formally renounced his allegiance to the English crown and declared his loyalty to France. This decision was not taken lightly, as it meant giving up his English lands and properties, as well as his membership in the prestigious Order of the Garter. Coucy's wife, Isabella, who was the daughter of King Edward III, chose to remain in England, and their marriage effectively ended. The French, now free from the constraints of the truce, launched a series of raids on the south coast of England. Under the command of Admiral Jean de Vienne, the French and Spanish fleets attacked the town of Rye, burning, looting, and killing. The destruction was brutal, and the French hoped to use this terror to force the English into a peace treaty. However, the English, led by their young king, refused to yield. The 100 Years' War would continue for many more years, with both sides suffering great losses. The conflict would shape the future of both England and France, leading to significant changes in their political and social structures. For Coucy, his decision to side with France marked the end of his double allegiance and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. His story is a testament to the complex and often personal nature of medieval diplomacy, where the loyalties of powerful individuals could alter the course of history. In a world where the power of words was as important as the strength of armies, the choices made by men like Coucy had far-reaching consequences. The 14th century was a time of great turmoil, but it was also a period of significant change, as the concept of nationhood began to take root in Europe. The 100 Years' War was not just a conflict between two kingdoms, it was a struggle that would redefine the very idea of a nation.